bad news, it's going to be 40 minutes. Thank you for those kind words. It's an honour to speak tonight at the British Academy, which has done so much to foster and champion the social sciences and humanities. In particular, I'd like to thank the Media Standards Trust and its chairman, Sir David Bell, for inviting me to deliver the first lecture on why journalism matters. Thank you, David. For once in my life, I don't get to have the last word. Now, as I've said earlier this year at a lecture at Yale, these are the best of times and the worst of times if you happen to be a journalist, especially if you are a business journalist. The best because our profession has a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to report, analyse and comment on the most serious financial crisis since the great crash of 1929. The worst of times because the news business is suffering from the cyclical shock of a deep recession and the structural change driven by the internet revolution. Now, this twin shock has led to a loss of nerve in some quarters, particularly in the newspaper industry, but not, thank goodness, at the FT. Last week, during a trip to Colorado and Silicon Valley, I was peppered with questions about the health of the Financial Times. The FT was in the peak, I replied, to some surprise. Indeed, a distinguished New York Times reporter, speaking on background, said, "We're all in the same boat, but at least we're all going down together." My task tonight, however, is not to preside over a wake, but to make the case for journalism, to explain why a free press and media have a vital role to play in an open, democratic society. I would also like to offer some pointers for the future, highlighting the challenges facing what we now call the mainstream media, and making some very modest suggestions on how quality journalism can not only survive, but thrive in the digital age. Now let me first begin on a personal note. My father, Frank Barber, was a journalist for 51 years. He left school at 15 with no qualifications other than a fierce desire for self-improvement. He started at the Leeds Weekly Citizen as a copy boy, and from there he worked his way up from the Yorkshire Evening News to the News Chronicle in London, the Sunday Times and the BBC World Service. He worked as a sub-editor, foreign correspondent and commentator. And his passion, I guess, somewhere must have rubbed off. Because just over 30 years ago, as mentioned, I started as a cub, and believe me, I was a cover reporter on the Scotsman in Edinburgh. And my younger brother, Tony, followed suit 4 years later, though he joined Reuters as a trainee in London and New York. Now, before this speech descends into sentimental nostalgia, I should stress that there was little room for theorizing about journalism in the Barber household. Anyone asking the question, why does journalism matter, would have been looked upon with astonishment, if not contempt. The case for journalism and the printed word was instinctive, not calculated. As my father would have said, or might have said, I write, therefore I am. Now, 30 years on, as the Media Standards Trust has recognised, we need to go back to first principles. We need to make the case for journalism. This is partly because the recession and the internet are undermining the business model that has sustained news gathering for more than a century. The World Wide Web has disrupted revenue streams and dramatically lowered the barriers to entry to the news business. And as The Economist noted, the business of selling words to readers and selling readers to advertisers, which has sustained their role in society, is falling apart. Even more important, the internet is challenging our conceptions about the practice of journalism. To some, the digital revolution represents freedom, a decisive break away from the old media oligopoly into a world which is more democratic, more innovative, and invites more civic participation. To others, this revolution will fundamentally change the way that people relate to the news. It threatens to undermine the role of mainstream media as the trusted intermediary or gatekeeper between the public and the authorities, which has long been part of our democratic society. And this is a theme which I want to explore tonight. Now, Lord Northcliffe, the British publishing magnate and owner of the Times and Daily Mail, amongst many other titles, once declared that news is what somebody somewhere wants to suppress, and all the rest is advertising. There is more than a grain of truth in this proposition, that we should be careful not to romanticize the news business. We need to be aware of its limitations as well as its inherent value. As Walter Lippmann, the American essayist, wrote in his seminal work, Public Opinion, newspapers do not try to keep an eye on all mankind. By its nature, news is selective, dependent on editors as well as readers' tastes. As Lippmann observed, the press is like a beam, like the beam of a searchlight, that moves restlessly about, bringing one episode and then another out of the darkness into vision. In other words, because of its very selectiveness, literally its partiality, news and truth are not necessarily the same thing.